Hello, my name is Tony Anagor, and I'm the founder of the Institute of Leadership and Negotiation, and I'm the host of your podcast, Empathy at the Table. You know, there was a time when boundaries between disciplines didn't exist. Leonardo da Vinci was a painter, an engineer, anatomist, and also a philosopher, despite each other, not because of each other. And somewhere along the line, we decided that expertise meant that you had to stay in your lane. But not for our next guest. He didn't get the memo. He's an ultra-endurance athlete, he's a mountaineer, he's a mediator and a communications expert. And the thread that runs through all of this is the same question. How do you get people to move in the same direction? And his answer is the Persuasion Blueprint. It's a framework that helps leaders and teams build the kind of communication that earns trust, loyalty, and referrals. Please welcome our next guest, Danny Bobrow. Welcome to Empathy at the Table. Danny Bobrow, welcome to Empathy at the Table.
Hey, thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here. How are you?
We got here eventually, right? After a couple of failed attempts, we're finally here.
Well worth it, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Danny, to kick off, there will be people who will be looking at the screen and thinking, well, so who has Tony got on the podcast today? Your background is really intriguing. You know, in the old days, you had people like Leonardo da Vinci, who they different disciplines. You had people. He was a scientist. He was also a philosopher. He was also an artist, and he took the best of these disciplines and just made himself who he was. And when I look at your background, it really is a mix of so many different disciplines. And I'd just like to, if you like, lay that playing field a little bit. Could you share wherever you want to start? Because I'm sure there's a rich tapestry there. But would you share what you think is relevant as a start point for us to have this conversation with our audience?
I'd be happy to. I think you may have set the bar rather high by comparing me to Leonardo da Vinci, but I'll soldier on nonetheless. I was born into a family of dentists, basically. And my father was a practicing dentist, my uncles, cousins, and my brother continues to practice dentistry. That's a very short way of explaining how I got into the dental niche. But that didn't happen for a while. Prior to that, and concurrent with that, I wore a number of different hats. And those included a mediator, arbitrator. I was in the insurance business. I was in investment business. And I guess what's maybe unusual, I went to school. I got an advanced degree on the continent and also one here at the University of Chicago. I live 45 miles from Chicago currently. But I'm also an ultra-endurance athlete, a mountaineer. And much of what I coach in the Persuasion Blueprint was informed by my experiences, both positive and let's say constructive, in team dynamics, leadership, and initially distinctly with a distinct prejudice towards how not to do it. And that was probably because of my upbringing. I was born with a vision impairment and continue to have that. It's rather serious, which meant that I thought I was smart and athletic, but had nothing to really demonstrate by way of evidence of either for quite some time. Eventually, I got reading glasses, and I learned an important distinction in high school from, of all people, my gym teacher. Probably taught me the most important and lasting lesson in my whole high school experience, and that was the psychological fatigue barrier, which is that our mind tells us to quit long before our body, or for that matter, our minds need to. So I became very persistent and resilient, but I was still somewhat of an independent operator. And when I got involved with team dynamics in business and also in the mountains, because most expeditions of any length are a team event, as are adventure racing events, I encountered a great deal of friction. And so I did have a background in sales and just really committed myself to understanding the psychological underpinnings of agreement and clarity. And that's really what informs most of what I coach people today through the Persuasion Blueprint.
A lot of times when I meet people, they tend to, which I think we are conditioned by society, right? Tend to lead with their profession, right? What they do for a living, and their identity is wrapped around what they do for a living. However, I'm more interested in the other stuff because from the age of, let's say you started working at 18, from the age of 0 to 18, you were a human being. You were something. You described yourself as something else, and there were things that informed the person you are today. And so, because I always think in our field, very few people at the age of 18 think, right, when I get older, I'm going to be a negotiation coach or I'm going to be, a corporate trainer. Uh, but the clues are there when you look at the background, when you look at what happened before. And so I noticed that you said that you actually started mountaineering at the age of 36.
Right.
And that's typically not something, not the age that most people would start that kind of pursuit. And so I'd like to know what's the leader, what's the kind of mindset that you had when you were from 0 to 18 that continued to work through that for you to decide that at the age of 36 you were going to start climbing mountains.
Well, that's a great question. I guess, when my economics professors, when I was giving him my background and, how late I came into lots of things, understanding and practicing things, he said, "You're the proverbial late bloomer, aren't you?" And I think that's true. But, it's funny, 0 to 18, what informed me, I think, there was the clue that I would pursue this line of inquiry and practice was that I really loved people and I felt somewhat alienated from people. So I had this drive to connect and be accepted and respected by my peers and parents and teachers and everybody. And I think it took until I became a bit older to realize how to accomplish and to realize that need. And then
Mm.
much to my surprise, I realized, and this was the real epiphany for me, is that it's not just me. In fact, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was the big epiphany for me, which enabled me to understand, connect with, and I believe impart some wisdom for people who are looking for the same thing in their lives and in their business.
Mm. And so we're building a picture of the person that you are, because I want to kind of build a picture of the person you are and then talk about what you do and then why you do it and how it helps. I also noticed that you do a lot of voluntary work, right? Could you maybe share a little bit about that work that you do and why you do that?
Yeah. Thanks for that question as well. And I haven't really talked about this, but my first foray into volunteer work was when I was 14 years old. I lived across the street from a park and Devonshire Park, and but not the Devonshire, not the one in England.
Yeah.
And I there was a group called Camp Calloway, which was a camp for what was then referred to as retarded children. I know we don't use that term anymore. But I was intrigued and thought this would be a nice opportunity to make a difference.
Mm.
And it was very interesting because when I first began my work as a 14-year-old, I was taken aback by the appearance and behavior of the children who were my age, sometimes some cases older and in some cases younger. I'd never been exposed to people who were mentally impaired and emotionally impaired or developed, although to some extent I was too. But uh, what really stuck with me and was remarkable is that it was in a matter of, if not really hours, their appearance became, it was no longer a factor because
Mm.
humanity spoke to me so quickly that I remember just noting it and saying, these are just regular people. It's just you have to approach them where they are with what they have and what they offer.
Mm.
Uh, And that's very interesting. I hadn't really thought about that because my really started to scratch the philanthropic itch as an adult. But I think what informed it was the sense of fulfillment that I derived and how it made me feel. And I grew up hearing, like everybody does, that it's better to give than to receive. And frankly, I grew up to a large extent with a bit of skepticism. I thought these were basically platitudes to keep people from killing each other in a society. Only over time did I realize that it's in fact the case, and that when you give, you get more. And that's why I started a foundation in 1992 called Climb for a Cause, which we continue to do today. It's We've evolved for the past, since 1998, we've been supporting primarily oral health education and treatment projects, which is consistent with the connections that I have in business, since so much of my work continues to be done in healthcare. But we have an annual hiking event, hence the name Climb for a Cause. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to bring people together, like-minded individuals who want to challenge themselves physically. They want to share remarkable experiences, and ultimately they want to make a difference in the world. So that's a little bit of insight into what I do. I mean, my work as a mediator and an arbitrator were also volunteer works, and got a great deal of insight and fulfillment from both of those gigs as well.
So say a bit more about the world of a mediator. The convention is that we think a mediator is where people come to you with their problems, and I've got a house and I want the house and my partner wants the house, and so we don't want to spend big money in litigation, so we need to go to somebody who can help us kind of walk through the situation and see it in a different light. Is it as simple as that, or I suspect it's much more nuanced?
Well, I think it is, and I think the other thing to realize is that often these people are not there willingly.
Right.
It's mandatory arbitration or mediation. Whether they've come there voluntarily or not, what I've learned is that it's very, very important initially to establish a level playing field, and that's in terms of where you sit and how you make eye contact and your body language, because people need to feel that they're in a safe and impartial environment. And that's informed my communication coaching and my own communication as well. That that persuasive communication is made or broken at the beginning of the interaction with your counterpart. So, yeah, mediation is a subtle process of letting people know that you, as the mediator, can be trusted, that you
Mm.
care and that you can be trusted. Because until you lay the foundation, ultimately you want to get to a collaborative point, which is why in the Persuasion Blueprint, our 3 stages of persuasive communication are caring, connection, and collaboration. So the first thing you need to do is to signal caring. And in our coaching, the frustration for a lot of people, and it's frankly table stakes before I can work with anybody successfully, is that they are a caring individual and that they're also a competent individual. That the ultimate prescription, whether it's in business, family, government, healthcare, uh, home remodeling, whatever we're talking about, that we bridge what I call the care gap, and that's the difference between how you feel about your counterpart and what your intentions are for that person, and how that person is perceiving you. So what we can do is help you signal caring quickly and frequently, so the person, gets it, that this is somebody that I know something about you. And then the next step is the connection step, which is demonstrating to this person that you understand them and what their wants, needs, fears, and desires are, and that you can perhaps articulate it even better than they can themselves. So once you've crossed those 2 hurdles of caring and connection, now you can move to the collaborative phase, which is helping to develop a co-path with your counterpart, which gives them a sense of ownership, and it further embeds trust, because they say, all right, I'm being respected. I care about you. I understand. And you've demonstrated that you understand and care about me. So let's build this path, whatever it is, a treatment plan, a remodeling plan, a way to have a meaningful discussion about a political dispute. Whatever it is, it's something that we're equal participants in effectuating.
Mm. So we will get onto that because I find that really interesting, and um, I think the general convention is if we're getting into collaborative negotiations, conversations, there's a body of work that needs to be done to build that bridge of empathy in primarily. But I always say to when I'm working with my participants, the first thing I ask them is can you tell me one thing that you would say has been what's a common denominator with all the conversations, the difficult conversations you've had, all the negotiations you've ever had? See if you can find what's the red thread that links all of them. And they say things like, well, empathy or win-win or stress or whatever. And the answer is you. At every difficult conversation, every negotiation you've ever had, you have always been there, right? So whether it's been good or bad, you've always been there. So therefore the work starts with you. That's why a lot of the work I do focuses on you, the person. And so I'm still interested in you, the person, because you bring a really unique mindset to the world of negotiation and conflict resolution. You run 100 mile races, for goodness sake. I mean, what a mindset that has to run 100 miles. I mean, can you talk about that? Not only do you climb mountains, but you're an ultra runner, and that must bring a completely new set of a completely new mindset to the way in which you approach these kind of conflict situations.
Well, I think it's a very good point, Tony, which is that persuasion begins with you or with
Right.
me, as you've stated. And I learned, again, by learning that distinction of the psychological fatigue barrier when I was 15 years old, I became persistent and resilient, but I was sort of an independent operator. And I can talk to people about being more persistent and more resilient, and how I got to that point. The mindset, as you mentioned, is one of growth and optimism. But what I really learned in the transformation that I needed to make before I became able to, as they say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Hmm.
I wanted to go far, still do. So I learned that I needed to temper my persistence and my uh, resilience with patience and respect. So now my watch phrases are respectful resilience and patient persistence. And that's the mindset that enables me to connect with people and to pull them. And pull isn't such it's better than push. I like to think in terms of pulling the best out of people rather than pushing them. The earlier self in tough situations would just basically push and sense their resistance as personal, that they were trying
Hmm.
to somehow sabotage or derail my laudable objective, which should be self-evident to you, well, shouldn't it? And I
Right.
realized that, well, people don't care about your vision and your goals until they know that you care about theirs.
Yeah.
There's so many examples in communication where people are minute wise and dollar foolish, to mix my metaphors, that we
Hmm.
think it's inefficient to take the time to understand, to gain clarity in communication, when it's probably the most efficient thing you can do, because when you remove resistance, then you get to agreement that much more quickly, and the agreement sticks. It's more reliable. So, I mean, that's a little bit about my mindset, and hopefully it gave you some insight and answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm thinking through now as you speak is so I did martial arts as a kid. I'm almost 60 now, and so I did martial arts for about 20 odd years, and I was a fierce competitor, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the competition. I enjoyed pushing myself to the limit, seeing how far I could go, and just testing myself, and I felt that when I then got into the business world, I had to temper that. I had to, no, not temper, I had to channel it. I had to channel that same level of competition and aggression, but I had to focus it in a different way. And so I'm trying to understand how somebody who runs 100-mile races, and you did 155 miles across the desert in Morocco, and that, the kind of mindset, the kind of persistent mindset to win, how that then translates into being able to have collaborative conversations with individuals. Maybe if you could help me paint a picture of how that works.
Yeah, I suspect, Tony, that you can probably identify very much with my experience because I too was a martial artist for 20 years.
All right.
And
Okay.
that competitive
Yeah.
mindset that you discuss uh, is probably what led me to my next step, which was to get involved in endurance sports, which were still individual. And, I probably got into martial arts uh, largely because of my vision impairment. I couldn't work in team sports because most team sports involve a projectile. And because of my lack of depth perception and visual acuity, that really wasn't an option for me. But I think that just to share with your audience, you probably get this already, but you said you had to channel that drive, that competitive spirit, and that's exactly what I had to do because we learned a certain limited set of skills that served us well, but we needed to evolve and expand the skill set beyond simply personal drive and competitive spirit and sense of satisfaction when you won a tournament or had a particularly good workout. These were pretty much self-centered experiences, and there's nothing like getting involved with a team to teach you that,
Right.
or being a parent, uh, that you need to, as you say, channel that drive in different directions, and that's where patient persistence and respectful resilience come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because the old limbic system still kicks in. There's nothing that's thousands of years of programming that we're never going to overcome. But I guess it's how we react to it, and how we channel that effectively when it comes to having these kind of challenging conversations and finding ourselves in conflict situations.
Absolutely, and it starts with us because,
Right.
yeah, we all have the same brain architecture, and our limbic system is our default, is our go-to response. We scan our environment to perceive and respond to threat, and what we need to do is regulate that and recognize it first and foremost in ourselves so that we don't get into a resistance vortex where somebody triggers, plugs in our limbic system, and then we respond. When I still fight with that, and I probably always
Yeah.
will, there are times when it happens to me mostly when I'm really busy and I'm doing a lot of different work and I get an email and in fact, a lot of work I'm doing now is how to coach people on being a more effective communicator in the written world. Because now with a lot of people, that's their go-to communication mode, text and not
Yeah.
even email so much. And so you really have to catch yourself because text and email can be misinterpreted very easily. They're often just mirrors or Rorschachs of what our current mental state or emotional state is. So we
Mhm.
need to slow down, take a breath when we receive those, because texts and emails can be misinterpreted. Directness can be misinterpreted as dismissal or invalidation.
Mhm.
So, really working on coaching people on how to slow down and uh, and respect the mode of communication that your counterpart prefers to engage in. Because if they're a Gen Yer, then or a Gen Z, I should say, that's what they were raised on, and it just goes down to boomers who boomers view email and text as dismissive and insufficient. And so we need to remodel that and recognize that, this is the environment that people were brought up in, and we need to respect and rise to that challenge, basically.
You know what I'm enjoying at the moment, just in general, that there seems to be almost like a paradigm shift in the world of business, where it's now okay to talk about emotions. It's now okay to understand that emotions have been driving us since forever. And although we try and say it's logic, but the logic, gives you a sense of feeling, and then based on the feeling that you might derive from the logic of seeing the data, then you act. And I really like this. And there was an interview that you did, and you used a phrase which I'm sorry, I've stolen this phrase, and I'll use it myself. It's you said it's getting granular with your emotions. I don't know whether you remember using that term, but I
I do.
really liked it. Yeah, can you share for the listeners what you actually mean by getting granular with your emotions?
Yeah, it's getting granular with your emotions and with your counterparts. And first I'll say that as a boomer myself, we were raised to discount emotion,
Yeah,
that it was a sign of weakness or maybe even impairment. Therapy in general was frowned
yeah,
upon
yeah, yeah.
in my generation, almost your generation.
Our generation,
You're right
yeah,
on the cusp.
yeah,
Yeah. But getting granular really has to do with going through a process, an empathy ladder, if you will, which is you observe what the person is expressing and you use neutral language initially. It sounds like this is very important to you, this subject, whatever we're talking about. And then they acknowledge it, and then you move to what I call soft labeling, which is, it seems to me that you're frustrated. And the person then responds, and maybe you're wrong, but if you're wrong, it's okay because you didn't say, well, I think you're frustrated.
mm,
You're not making that much of a commitment. You're trying to keep things somewhat still neutral, soft, I would say, not neutral. When the person acknowledges that they're feeling frustrated, then you get a little more precise. And you say, well, what is, is your frustration born of a lack of being heard by the team? And they'd say, yes, that's right. And then you want to move on to the, establishing meaning, getting to their truth. So it's important that that you feel heard by the team. And they say, yes, that's right. And then you move to the collaborative bridge, which is to say something like, well, I'm glad I understand where you're coming from now. Would you like to explore how we can ensure that the team does a better job of hearing what you have to say? And so it's sort of like an onion that we're peeling away, starting with neutral surface communication, because you don't want to dive in there too soon. You'll create resistance. And depending on the subject, it could be deep seated. It could be identity resistance, which is the toughest form of resistance
yeah,
to
yeah,
deal with, where somebody's identity is bound in the subject that you're discussing. So that's what I mean by getting granular. And doing it with yourself too, which is not always so easy. When
yeah,
we're rushed and reactive, it's really important to breathe and to verbalize. And I believe, I don't know if this is actually true, I think it's true, that when you verbalize an emotion, your limbic system, you regulate the limbic system and you move to the prefrontal cortex
yeah,
where executive and cognitive thought and function reside. And the very act of verbalizing emotions for yourself and your counterpart increases the likelihood that you're going to be able to have a logical conversation, because you mentioned logic before, and I think we use logic more to validate our decisions than to make decisions.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think we make decisions based on emotion,
yeah,
and then justify
yeah,
it with
yeah,
logic. So,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I definitely agree with that, and in fact, I teach that if you want to take something from an irrational, emotional sense, just kick it up to the executive department of the frontal cortex, and give it a name, right? And just and it takes the focus away from there, but it also lowers that pressure, that resistance, because you're now it's like you have a fear of something in the dark, and then when you put the light on, you see, well, there was nothing there anyway, or it was just your teddy bear sat in the corner, and it's nothing's really changed, but you've just been able to give it a name. And so I'm very much a fan of that, and I do it on myself as well, and I know it works. So I do. Um, I'm just going to ask this question straight out because I get this question a lot. And there are some purists in the negotiation world who are, their noses are always put out of joint when they see people coming from other disciplines coming into, what was, I don't know, historically the world of negotiators who've been doing this for years, in the world of business. And then suddenly you get these hostage negotiators, or you get these other experts coming into the world and trying to tell us how we should do our business. I've got my thoughts on that. I'd love to hear yours.
I think that we're talking about human relationship, human communication, and I think there's nothing more complex in the universe than that, probably. And so I think it's somewhat presumptuous to believe that it's static and that we're not going to continue to learn and grow. I'm a big fan of Chris Voss. You may know, he wrote Never Split the Difference, a hostage negotiator. And I think he brought in the concept of strategic empathy, among other distinctions. And I think that represents a significant step forward in understanding people's needs and getting out of the not getting into the prefrontal cortex too soon. Assuming that, not bringing facts to a feelings fight, as
Mm,
Toba Hellerstein likes to say. And
mm,
what we're discussing today, I'm fully prepared to accept the likelihood that we're going to that 5-10 years from now, I'm going to look back and say, boy, I had a lot of blind spots.
yeah, right, right.
Now, being open, having a growth mindset, and that's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm trying my level best to have the Persuasion Blueprint represent a synthesis of what preceded it, and to pull the best lessons and to maybe reframe the lessons that don't fit today's
Mm,
interaction. I like what you said about the fact that emotions are becoming acceptable, and talking about them, and I think that is acceptable, and I think that marks a significant and positive step forward.
yeah. This is a question. I know it's an anvil that has worn out many hammers in down the ages, but difference between persuasion, influence, and manipulation. Where's the line? What do you say to that?
Oh, yeah, I love that question, and I also add convincing and selling in there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you said sales or not. You said influence and manipulation. I think you talked about shining a light, in the dark. I think people who they perceive persuasion as manipulation because it's, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but it's born of ignorance. It's born of a lack of understanding and a fear and ignorance that this is something I'm not good at and I don't want to be subject to it, because people have an innate need to feel in control. But to me, persuasion is the most honest form of communication there is, depending on who's using it. You may be a little too young to remember the movie Shane with Alan Ladd, but you mentioned a hammer and an anvil, and he in one of his lines, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the line exactly, but he said that a gun is just like a hammer. It's as ethical as the person using it. And to me, persuasion is nothing more than using a series of skill sets and mindsets to influence people toward a course of action that's in their interest. So it couldn't be farther from manipulation. And I also like to distinguish it from convincing, because for me, convincing is simply getting somebody to, or encouraging someone to change their opinion, attitude, or maybe even belief. But you can more easily convince someone that they should lose weight or get fit than you can to get them to take the action of actually committing to an exercise or weight loss program. But so persuasion is like selling, to me, is communicating virtues of a product, but it's really just empowering people to make an informed decision. And the
Mm,
decision might be that what you have to offer is not in their best interest. As long as you're willing to go into this communication in an honest, open manner with the goal of removing clutter and creating clarity so that people can see if what you have to offer is in their best interest, then that's about as ethical as it gets, I think.
mm, mm. So let's look at the persuasion blueprint. the three C's. The thing that sparked my curiosity is the first one, caring. And you said it when you mentioned there, which I think shone a bit more light on it. You mentioned there's almost like there were two levels of caring. There's one is being a caring person, and the other thing is actually caring about the other person. And as you were explaining it, in my mind, I made two distinctions. I don't know whether you make those distinctions, whether being a caring person versus actually caring about the other person.
Well, I do make a distinction, but it's not, to me, being a caring person means that you care about another person. I think the distinction is you can have empathy. You can feel and understand why a person feels and acts as they do. But that's going to be a very well kept secret until you learn how to engage in what I think is termed affective empathy, which is being able to demonstrate to the person that you care about them. And that's where I talk about the care gap, which is that difference between intention and perception. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but that's in my mind the
Mm,
distinction and what we really work on. That I assume that somebody with whom I'm working does care, does have a big view of humanity, is not in it for themselves
mm,
entirely. I mean, everybody has a self-interest, and that's fine. The goal is to try to align those interests so that you can
mm,
collaborate with your counterpart to uh,
mm.
provide a solution that's in their best interest.
There's a voice I hear in my head. There's several people who I get DM messages on LinkedIn or on Instagram or emails, and there's a body of people who say we don't really care. If we're in a negotiation, we hope that they get a great deal, but do we care that they get a great deal? No. What we do is we care that we get a great deal, and then we assume that if they care just as much, then we'll be forced to collaborate in the right way. But am I going to think about them when I get home this evening? No, they're not. And the example that's been used is, does a big company like Amazon really care about the end user, the customer, when they enter into a transaction? No, they don't. But what they might do is they might use the fact that you care to manipulate you to get what they want. So there's that discussion about the David and Goliath and the misuse of power.
There is, and in here in Voss's book, the title tells it all. It says, "Never split the difference."
Hmm.
Don't go into a negotiation feeling that the only fair outcome is where each person gets exactly what they want or gets half of what they want. And Robert Ringer spoke about winning through intimidation. It was that informed my upbringing, early work in sales. And his premise was that the premise was that everybody's out for your chips.
Right,
Everybody
right,
wants your money. And the only distinction is that there are people who are honest with themselves about it. There are people who are not honest about it. And that, the most honest people are the ones who tell you that I'm coming for you.
right, right.
But, well, let's talk about Amazon. They're an extremely successful company because they deliver or exceed people's expectations. So we need to understand there are transactional and there are relational exchanges that take place. And Amazon isn't a person. It has a face, it has Jeff Bezos, people know. And when they get negative press about how they're treating their people, I think that it can have a deleterious effect on their prospects. I know personally, and I think Bill Maher says this too, is that, and I don't, I just mentioned it because I do respect much of what Bill Maher has to say, but I believe this independent of that. If getting me my order by 5 o'clock today, when I ordered it today, means somebody has to break their neck or risk their well-being to get it to me, I don't want it by 5
Yeah.
p.m. So there is a certain humanity because I realize that Amazon is comprised of hundreds of thousands of people. So I think the reason that a company can be successful without truly caring about its counterpart, I think that's temporary, that's ephemeral. I think if the public gets a sense that you're really only in it for the money, that you're going to, that's a shaky foundation you're built on. But, you raise an interesting point because, people have been polled and, they say they want social responsibility, and then they buy the product that's the cheapest.
Right.
Or they want good customer service, but they're not willing to pay enough to allow the vendor to deliver customer service. So that's why they resort to AI and outsourcing to developing countries where the wages are so low. So, I'd say that as a species, we have a way to go yet in terms of really demonstrating our caring on all
Yeah.
levels. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, though.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And you know what? For me, the narrative is changing. Yeah, I don't know, what's going on maybe in on your side of the mountain, but certainly the conversations I'm having, people who would not normally have these conversations. I mean, I worked with a client quite recently, and I was told as I was preparing the workshop, the workshop program director said to me, "Hey, remember these people? They don't do emotions." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "They're executives, so they don't do emotions."
Okay.
And I went, "Which emotions don't they do?" And he laughed, and I said, "Well, unless they're trees, then they will do emotions. Just watch." And we did. It was a half day workshop, and by the end, everybody was they were fantastic, and they were sharing, and they were exchanging, and they
I would like
realized
to.
that's where the magic is, right? And when you start to look at that and look at how you show up. We have this saying that better humans make better leaders, and if you are good inside, then that shows on the outside in the way you interact. So I'm encouraged by the conversations I'm having. And I think more than that, what I'm really encouraged by, Danny, is the fact that the people who are real protagonists for this type of work are really standing up, and they're not being shy anymore. They're standing up and really pointing a finger at the great improvements and the great leaps forward we can get when we actually stop, do that work, right? Do that internal work to figure out, what how am I showing up? What are the blind spots? You mentioned blind spots, right? What are the blind spots that right now are uh, slowing me down that I don't see? So therefore, I have to put myself in a vulnerable position to ask somebody to share what they see. And give me the choice. So I'm really encouraged by this anyway. Before I
Yeah.
go off on a rant, but there's something I wanted to ask you as well. With the Persuasion Blueprint, um, for a listener who's just heard about this for the first time, the Persuasion Blueprint, what does the world look like with the Persuasion Blueprint in it versus the world without it?
I humbly submit that it's a better world because it does recognize the humanity and that interaction should be relational, not merely transactional, and that we view the humanity. We take the time to really get clear on what our counterpart needs. And to your point, I think that maybe the increase in attention that I'm seeing in a number of industries that I work in, too, a number of
Mm,
verticals on human relationship and workshops, seminars, coaching opportunities like I offer, it could be a response to the AI revolution as well. I think people are, and I think AI is great. It's not an unqualified endorsement. I think there are dangers and pitfalls, as well as situations where AI is not appropriate. But I think it's a great efficiency builder. But I think that people, switched on people, tuned in people, recognize that if you over reliance on AI runs the risk of diminishing our humanity, and that is a perilous path to be on. So I
mm,
think that may be what's behind it. It's sort of a response to or a reaction to the push for AI. Uh,
mm.
I know that in healthcare, for instance, there are a lot of teams in medical and dental practices, for instance, who are only too excited to offload the responsibility for answering the phone call and actually talking to people. And I don't think it's because they don't care. I think it's because they're stressed and they're ill-equipped to effectively connect with people. So everybody actively avoids something that's unpleasant. And so the good news is that there are simple to acquire and master tools that make it more effective and even more fun, because I think at the end of the day, it's a lot more fun working with a fellow human being and getting the sense of satisfaction and joy, which is literally the emotion that people get when they finally say, "Hey, you really hear me. You get what I need, and you're willing to work with me together on this." And how refreshing that is when you compare it
Mm.
with what people are experiencing more and more these days. If they're talking to humans at all, it's people that haven't been coached on how to close the care and trust gaps. That's
Danny,
frustrating.
we could go on. We are coming to the end, and I'm sure people who are listening would love to know more. And so maybe you could just as we finish off, what is it that you're working on right now that's really exciting you, and how can our listeners find you?
Well, they can find me at dannybobrow.com. My name is on the screen there, and that's all you need to do. And when you get there, you can learn about the Persuasion Blueprint. You can also click a link to my foundation to learn about how we do well by doing good. And if you want, you can receive your persuasion score, which is just a free series of questions that we ask you to complete. And that's intended to establish a baseline for where you're at right now in terms of caring, connection, and collaboration. And then we can have a strategy call, and it's all complimentary. I'm interested in connecting with you and seeing how and whether we can be of assistance. As far as what I'm working on now, I touched on it earlier, Tony, which is wanting to get a deeper understanding of how these and what my base of my or the results of my research show that, yeah, there are generational differences. We touched upon briefly how people communicate and what they expect in terms of communication. But the good news is that these are surface differences, that at the end of the day, the needs that this persuasion blueprint is intended to address are universal. It doesn't mean that we don't want to modify our communication by recognizing somebody's preferred mode of communication, and also understanding that maybe they don't understand how a short, curt text could be misperceived by us as dismissal or invalidating. And so we don't want to respond in kind or react. We want to take it in and then communicate in a way that's going to connect with them, and maybe inadvertently raise the level of communication, or unknown to them, because I think respect begets respect. And when you respond in a way that is respectful, most people they notice. And all of a sudden the communication changes. And that's what really ignites my passion about all of this is the aha moments when people and there's subtle shifts. I'm not suggesting to people that you don't know how to communicate. I don't know you, and you probably are a very effective communicator in certain respects. And a slight shift could make you an even more effective communicator. That's what I aim to do.
Well, that's great. I'd love you to come back and talk to us in the future once you've developed those concepts further. Would
My
you?
pleasure. Absolutely.
Great.
This was fun, Tony. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Danny, and thank you, the listeners, for joining us on Empathy at the Table. And if you've liked this, please give us a like, and don't forget to share with your friends, and come back and see us again. Danny Bobrow, thank you very much for joining us on Empathy at the Table.
It was my pleasure, Tony. Thank you.